This is the Part-Time Faculty Symposium, co-sponsored with the California Part-Time Faculty Association. And so we are just a few minutes over time, but I hated to interrupt you as we're in a great discussion. So welcome back. We're getting to our legislative update, creating positive change through good trouble. I just want to remind you again of the format. We hope that you have your microphones on mute, or we may actually mute your microphone. The format this time will be different. I'll present 3 questions, actually 3 to 4 questions, depending on our timing, and give them one at a time and wrap up with the last question. And there will be interaction during that time. We can take questions. Again, you can go into the chat and I'll be checking that. So we can also do questions that way, but we'll have time at the end for people to share. And so I'm going to turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves, although most of you are familiar with them. Again, this is Legislative Update, Creating Positive Change Through Good Trouble, Conversations about Advocacy and Action for the Future. And this is Evan Hawkins and John Martin. So I think, why don't you just introduce yourselves, a little bit about yourselves, and then I'll give you your first question.
Great, sounds good. Well, I will start first. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for being here on a Saturday. It's great to see so many folks attending the Part-Time Faculty Symposium. My name is Evan Hawkins, the Executive Director for the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges. And one of my main responsibilities in this position is to do a lot of the advocacy work within the state capitol on a variety of the legislative and budget issues that we'll be talking about today. So it's great to be with you all. Thank you.
Yes, my name is John Martin, and I'm the chair of the California Part-Time Faculty Association, otherwise known by the acronym CPFA. I've been involved with CPFA since the turn of the century, and I teach part-time, obviously, at Shasta View College, U.S. History. Having said all that, because we're going to talk about legislation, just very quick. I started walking the halls of Sacramento working with FAC and Jonathan Lightman. I learned a lot from him. And one of the reasons I was able to do this over the almost 18 years is because I've been blessed with my geographical location. In other words, I'm only an hour and 15 minutes away from Sacramento. So I'm basically the go-to person to represent CPFA, to drive down to Sacramento and talk to legislators and walk the halls. So I developed an incredible amount of relationship with staff members, political directors, and a few legislators. So I think my background and my expertise, what I wouldn't call expertise, but I know a lot through personal experience that I can add to this that final hour here.
Great. Thank you, John and Evan.
I have to stay out of my space for.
So let's see, we've got, again, remember to keep yourself muted. Sometimes if you accidentally click on the space bar or something, it might unmute you. So keep that in mind. I'm going to start with the first question, or it's not really a question, but can you please share examples of the advocacy work you do for your respective organizations? And I don't know, Evan, you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. So the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges represents full and part-time community college faculty here in the state. And we do a lot of work around, of course, issues that would impact, benefit, and pushing back against issues that would harm our members, faculty. Over the years, we've done a number of different things that I'm going to highlight here. Within the budget, there is a specific line item, which is deeply underfunded, but an item about part-time faculty support and part-time faculty office hours. Those two items are two examples of things over the years that FAC has been able to get into the budget And again, we continue to advocate to get a lot more money, the needed money to be able to fund that appropriately. And that is something we've continued to do. In fact, most recently, Governor Newsom in his proposed budget, after a couple months after sort of COVID started, which we were looking at this massive budget deficit, proposed to cut both of those things. So you have two items that are already deeply underfunded, proposed to being cut even more, was incredibly outrageous for our organization. And we spent a lot of time pushing back against that. And it was sort of interesting because you had this sort of dynamic where you had proposals to cut what is already an underfunded program for part-time faculty. And then you had a proposal to continue to fund a brand new online college called Calbright that serves less than 500 students and receives incredibly much more funding than these two part-time faculty items. So Debbie Klein, our FAC president, who was introduced earlier, ended up writing an op-ed on this piece saying, look, let's close Calbright, let's use that money and give it to part-time faculty. And that piece was published in a couple different locations. And that was our argument. And that's kind of what we stuck with. Now, we are not within that budget cycle, we were not able to get more part-time faculty, and we've got a funding, but we were able to push back against those cuts and get those cuts never ended up happening. So that's sort of one example I want to give of just a very recent one of what happened just most recently with the budget. And I'll pause there and let John chime in.
Thank you. Sally, can you refresh my memory about your question again? I want to make sure I got it right.
Got to unmute. So share an example or share examples of the advocacy work you do for your organization, for CPFA.
Thank you. One of the things that we've done is when I make my trip to Sacramento, I also meet with my legislative analyst, Raymond Brennan. We've been doing this for a number of years. So Raymond and I have been visiting legislators for 10, 15 years, even before he came on CPFA. And I regret he had to resign and step down from CPFA just recently for other work he had to do. But one of the things that Raymond and I have always talked about is that whatever we do in Sacramento at CPFA, it has to do the right thing, as Frank had mentioned, but also that anything that we propose at and look at is a no-cost item. Because anytime you propose anything in Sacramento, they want to know, well, how much does it cost? How much does it cost? And I said, well, we make the argument that there's no cost involved, and we lay out our arguments. But we know and I'll talk about them in a second, that we've had a couple of bills, especially one or two, that one was definitely no cost, and the others had no cost either. And we were successful in one of those, and that is when we infiltrated the state capitol to change the 60% workload to 67%. Now, I say inside work, it's because they had people like Peggy McCormick and Robert Yoshioka. They were working for a legislator on payroll, and their sole purpose was to raise the cap. At that time, we wanted to raise it. The legislative proposal was to raise it to 85%, believe it or not. But we got a lot of pushback from full-time faculty organizations, and they screamed and hollered, and the representative Assemblyman Dymond pulled back and said, I'm done. And we were very fortunate that FAC was hanging around after the meeting with our full-time faculty organizations. Andrea York was her name. I don't know where she is now. And David Hawkins, he was with CFA at the time, California Faculty Association for the CSU system. And they stuck around to help us out with new language to craft it to 67%. That was a no-cost item. The other, we want to keep that in mind. The other attempt that we made was that we wanted to keep in mind no-cost item to change our name from temporary to contingent. Doss Williams from Santa Maria or Santa Barbara authored that bill, and believe it or not, we had one supporter that was from FAC, Andrew York supported us throughout the process, but it died because it had too much money it cost. And district will always do that. It'll cost $100,000. It'll cost $100,000. So immediately there's a cost item for even the seniority system that we ultimately got back. So we supported that as well. So I just wanted to show those couple items that we have worked at, and maybe I can show on the screen later some of the cover letters that we wrote on these particular bills. So that's my conclusion. I hope I addressed that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. So the next question is, what is the status of the state budget and how will budget conversations play out next year? For instance, will there be funding for office hours, wage increases and benefits in this precarious time? Evan?
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, it's precarious time is a perfect way of putting it, Sally. And it's been sort of a fascinating and deeply difficult year when it comes to the budget. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we had a little bit over a $50 billion deficit is what the Governor Newsom and his Department of Finance projected back in, I believe that was in May. And that is a massive amount. And actually, if you want to sort of compare it to the Great Recession, that sort of amount that we were facing in one year was comparable to what we faced over the entire 3 years of the Great Recession. It was kind of, it all happened at once. And it was a lot of concern about what sort of, what cuts are going to look like. What are we going to do in this environment? And that was, of course, just a projection at the time. And what ended up happening is instead of instituting those cuts, the Department of Finance, the legislature, and the governor determined that they would use a system of deferrals for our community college districts. So deferrals are essentially IOUs. So the legislature and the state government is saying, all right, look, community college districts, we're not going to be able to pay you this year the amount that we are supposed to, but we'll pay you a few months from now, or, and there's like a timeline for that. But that's essentially what it is. A little bit more nuanced than that. But what that means is districts are going to potentially have more than a little bit of a cash flow trouble for the immediate future here. However, districts have reserves to be able to prepare for this, and they also have the ability to borrow money and borrow money with really low interest rates through state programs that are out there. And in general, the interest rates are really low right now, as we all know. So I say this because there should not be any excuse for districts to make any sort of cuts. We all understand, you all know that when cuts happen in our system, they happen on the back of part-time faculty, right? And our organization has been really clear that we believe that first of all, that shouldn't occur. And it shouldn't occur because of all the reasons that have been mentioned today. But additionally, we do not want to turn away students at our community colleges. We remember from the Great Recession, we turned away hundreds of thousands of students. We want to make sure during these difficult times that students who want to come to our colleges are able to do so. And of course, part-time faculty are the majority of faculty within our system and teach those courses. So it is a matter of being able to keep us right where we were at before the recession. We believe our districts can do that. Now, I'm sure I will hear about a lot of stories, and I have, from districts that have not done that. I've heard all the stories of also enrollment drops, right? So this is sort of a different environment than what we had during the last recession when enrollment increased. So I understand all that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. But all of that has made sort of a complicated budget of where we're at right now. Deferrals instead of cuts, but still that creates challenges, and you all are feeling these challenges locally. And I've heard it all I've heard your stories the last couple of days, and additionally from our part-time faculty leaders regularly about what's happening on the ground, and there's much work to be done. Moving forward, it's going to be very interesting to see what the budget looks like next year. If you would have asked me 3 or 4 months ago, I would have said, oh, more cuts, more, it's going to be really difficult. But now, especially with what happened today, I think it might be a little bit different. So 2 things that give me a little bit more optimism. Obviously, with the new administration, that I think provides us with some more openings. Having said that, I think it's federal administration, excuse me. Having said that, the Senate will, I think, almost assuredly be controlled by Republicans who have not been interested in doing stimulus, particularly stimulus that helps local and state governments. Now, having said that, there'll be a special election on January 5th that will determine that, but that's sort of my analysis now. I hope that I'm wrong. So it'll be interesting to see how kind of those negotiations play out. But if there is a compromise and there is funding that comes to state government, that will be really helpful in helping us push back against any cuts. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the projections about the loss of revenue for the state are actually not accurate so far. So the state is getting even more money than it expected in the first 3 months of the fiscal year, more than $8 billion more. So that's a significant amount. So I am very curious to see how Governor Newsom handles this in January. In January, his budget proposal comes out, and he's going to tell us loud and clear how he sees the budget and what it means. And we're going to be prepared and ready to fight. And if there's any cuts to the part-time faculty office hours support, we will be there to fight it. But more important than that, we will be doing more to increase funding and increase part-time faculty support. And we've been successful to a degree in doing so with the chancellor's office, which in its system budget request is requesting more money for part-time faculty support, which is helpful. I think ultimately this is about building coalitions. I've heard conversations about that throughout the last couple of days, and having the state chancellor's office in support of this. Again, not putting enough money behind it. I want to be very clear, but moving the ball forward is significant. So that's how I see the budget. We've got a lot of work to do. I hope you all stay tuned. We're going to talk about ways that you can get engaged, because your voice will really make a difference on the impact of it. So definitely want to hear John's perspective as well on this.
Thank you. I want to share a screen here. I hope I can do it. Can everybody see this?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. One of the things that CPFA has been trying to do, and Raymond and I have been trying to do when he was my legislative analyst, is that we go to the budget language, and this is the old 2017 thing, AB 96, and I shared this with CTA's advocate, and CTA is going to look into this. I've shared this with Evan Hawkins just recently, and one of the things that troubles me, this language is in there every year. And if you go, and I pulled out some stuff here for you to look at. Again, this is 2017. You have part-time faculty health insurance. You have a line item there, faculty compensation and office hours. I think Evan's correct. These numbers will change, definitely, because of COVID-19. But what I wanted to stress here, this notion about this faculty compensation, we've been talking about pay parity, and that'll cost money. Maybe if we defund Calbright, this funding will go strictly to us, as Evan has remarked. But one of the things that's very sinister, and a yellow highlight if everybody can read here, this is for the compensation, part-time pay. Very sinister, and I'll read it out loud. If the community college district achieves parity between compensation for full-time faculty and part-time faculty, funds received pursuant to this provision may be used for any other educational purposes. That is a red herring. There is no oversight. There's no accountability. There's no proof. Districts don't have to send a letter to the chancellor's office saying they've reached parity. So any money that they apply for wages, they can do whatever they want to do. This is something that's very wrong about how part-time faculty pay is being distributed. So this is one of the things I'm looking at that CPFA, and I'm sure FACT and CTA will look into, because they're fully aware of this now. It has been a little bit wrong, but this is one thing we're going to look at for the future in our budget here. So I think Evan and I think some other the FACT people had laid out beautifully what we want in a budget, and CPFA will no doubt follow it. So this is my little contribution about discussing the budget here.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
Evan and Sally.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. And this, yeah, I appreciate you pointing this out. And I think I just want to kind of, one of the political challenges we have in trying to do the things we've just mentioned is the districts will obviously have their lobbyists as well, as you all know, and they'll make arguments about wanting flexibility. So this sentence in there is all about that flexibility point, right? And that's one of the challenges that we have. And I think uniquely we have when we're advocating on behalf of asking the state to basically mandate that districts do certain things on behalf of part-time faculty, because from our perspective, that's the only way it's going to happen. You all, and I see it happening right now in the chat, you all are explaining how these unique challenges each of you have within your district. And I think from our perspective, this requires statewide, state level intervention to be able to make the changes we need to see. We are very clear about that. And that's what we advocate for when we're advocating on behalf of all of you at the state capitol. So it can't just be a piece by piece, right? A district by district solution. There are some districts that do a good job, but most of them are not anywhere where they need to be. In order to get there, the state has to step up. The state has to take responsibility. And it's interesting because we meet with candidates all the time, right? I mean, there's a number of candidates that were successful in the recent election that FAC had endorsed, and we met with them early, and we always ask them this question. We ask them, are you aware of the inequities between full and part-time faculty within the community colleges? That is a question we ask every single candidate who has ever come in to the California legislature. And a lot of them aren't. And a lot of them, if they are, it's at a very surface level, as you can imagine, right? So we dive deep into it. We take that opportunity to educate them and tell them. And after explaining the situation, they say, yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm supportive of your position. And we say, great. But, you're going to have the districts come in and they're going to tell you, well, yeah, that's true. But, we need the flexibility to do it locally. So we do a follow-up and we say, okay, you support us, but you support as a state legislator taking state action to fix this problem. And we've had more and more legislators support this position. So certainly we expect to hopefully make some more progress here, but there's still obviously a lot more work to be done. But I think a big key and a big part of this is the education aspect of it. And as we conclude our session here today, we're going to be talking about next steps. And I know John and I will have some ideas on how you all can do that.
Yeah, talking about a no-cost item and a no-brainer item, I'm going to invite Raymond here to interject here about AB 897, because I still get emails. What happened to AB 897? So, Raymond, I'm going to give you 60 seconds of my time to review what happened to AB 897.
Okay, thank you, John. Well, as most of you know, AB 897 was the attempt to bring the cap on teaching for part-time faculty from 67% to 85%. And we got that. That bill was carried by Medina's office. He did a great job with this. And it went unopposed through both houses. It survived the Senate Higher Ed Committee, and all we needed was the governor's signature, and everything looked really good about the 1st of March. And then, I don't know if you heard about this, but there was this virus thing that happened a couple of weeks later. And what Governor Newsom did was he asked the legislators to please pull back their bills unless they were related to COVID sorts of relief. So AB 897, I think, was well on its way to the governor's desk. We know it was going there, but it was set aside because of the COVID crisis. It will be revived again in January. It'll have a new number. Medina's office is willing to carry it again. And so we're hoping that in whatever next January is, 2022, I guess, it gets signed, if not before that. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you. I'm ready for the third question.
Okay, well, maybe we'll give it to you first then, if it's okay with Evan. All right, so the third question is, well, I actually rephrased it into a please give us. So please give us an idea of what legislation could be proposed next year that would benefit part-time faculty.
Yeah, CPFA is in discussion right now about what we want to do. But from my vantage point, again, I'm going to stick with my mantra. Anything that we propose and talk to legislators about is a no-cost item. And then, of course, we can follow up with the slogan, it's the right thing. One of the things that I've been hearing across the state as a chair of CPFA, I get emails. I get messages from districts that are not honoring the seniority bill that we had passed several years ago. I mean, there's just, some are just outrageous, really outrageous. So one of the things that we want to try to do is find an author to a legislature to tighten up the seniority list. I mean, there's a district out there that says you can't get into the seniority list. Oh, we'll put you in the seniority list as of today. What? I've been there for 20 years. Well, we're going to have you on your seniority list, but it starts today. And so there's a whole wide range on how the seniority system is not working for us. One of the things I've just been thinking about lately, and I talked to several people about this, including Stacy Burks, is that because we have evaluations at Butte College, we have had some part-time faculty, and I'm sure this is across the state, is that districts do not have to put down in writing what, and the phrase here I'm looking for is just cause. If you're let go, they can just say, see you later, because you're temporary. And we tried to put a bill several years ago to change temporary to contingent. And in that bill, we had just cause. So maybe this is the time to revisit that language change that we think is so offensive for many of us, because we're not temporary, because we're hired every semester and every summer. And so just cause is a phrase I really like. We're very familiar with due process. So it's just an extension of just cause. The other item that I think is a no cost item is absolutely no overloads, period. And we can massage it to say emergency only, and we can massage it and tweak it later. Say until we're back to business as usual, that means COVID-19 has disappeared, or business as usual at community colleges, where we have face-to-face teaching again. So maybe this is the perfect opportunity to raise the overload issue, because again, for every class is taught by a full-timer, that's one less class that we teach. And then we have to be either underemployed, unemployed, and then we have to go on unemployment and apply for unemployment, and therefore the district have to pay not on unemployment, also they have to pay a full-time faculty to teach the same class that we could have been teaching ourselves. So those are the couple of things I look forward to the next legislative year. Again, no costs involved. Now, one more thing, there's a lot of talk about pay parity. CCA is talking about pay parity. I'm on the committee. It seems promising. In my mind, I'm not sure how it would work. And I think one of the trouble things about it that I don't know if there's funding unless we take money from Calbright to take it away and give it to pay parity. So that's one solution. So, Evan, go ahead.
Thanks, John.
Evan, a quick question, because a quick interruption.
Yes.
There are a couple of people that have questions. Do you want to wait or?
So I have just a couple things to say to follow up to John, if that's okay, and then maybe we get into questions. We can probably get into all the questions right after that. Is that all right? And I can talk a little bit about the legislation piece and then go into it.
Yes. Okay. So Scott and Rick, just hold on a bit, and we'll let Evan have his say.
Just real quickly, yeah, and then we'll be good to just spend the rest of the time pretty much on questions. So John, I agree with him completely that any legislation that's going to cost money is going to be a challenge this year. I think obviously I mentioned the budget environment earlier, but we also have COVID that we're still going to be working through. Obviously, fires that we're still going to be working through, housing issues we're still going to be working through. So my understanding is the legislature is going to be focusing a lot of time around those three. But within higher education, we do believe that there should hopefully we'll still be pushing for increased funding, but it's going to have to be very limited in scope. So legislation that doesn't deal with increased funding, I think, will be more likely to be successful. And to that point, as Raymond mentioned earlier, John and Raymond mentioned earlier, the bill to increase the 67% cap is something that FAC co-sponsored last year, and I suspect would do so again moving forward, and would work with CPFA and other organizations on that. But additionally, our organization is also looking at the bills that we're going to do. Every year, we sponsor usually a couple bills in addition to co-sponsoring many others that have been successful over recent years. And I'll give an example. Just this year, we had a bill signed when most bills weren't signed that allowed for lottery funds to be used for student basic needs issues, to sort of allow for that money to be tapped into in a different way. Additionally, a year prior, we had got a bill signed that would allow sick leave to be transferred regardless of when you earn that sick leave. Previously, there was a cap to when you could transfer it. So I suspect many of you have taught at many different districts throughout your career. You should go back and get the sick leave that you earned, because that will be very helpful for you. And obviously, you earned it. That's your benefit. You deserve it. And to John's point earlier, in terms of districts actually being doing what the law says, we've had some challenges with that one as well, unfortunately. So there's always the enforcement aspect of legislation, no doubt. But those are two bills that we've done recently. And what we're looking for next year, as we're in discussions now, and we'll have bills formally proposed at the start of around January, is a bill that would strengthen academic freedom protections, and specifically do so for part-time faculty. I've really heard, and I've heard over the course of my career at FAC, but just here during the Part-Time Faculty Symposium, you were talking about evaluations earlier. Yesterday, a faculty member was talking about challenges of faculty being hired because of maybe something they said or something like that, or being fired for discipline for something they said during a meeting, right? I mean, academic freedom is something that needs to be protected, needs to be defended. And of course, part-time faculty without tenure don't have anywhere near the protections as they should. So we're looking at a lot of stuff around academic freedom as something that would be a no-cost item that could hopefully boost protections for part-time faculty. So those are some of the things we're looking at now. Certainly want to hear the perspective from the group as we're still sort of finalizing our legislation, and want to hear from you all on what we can do in the Capitol. So I'll stop there and allow us to get into questions.
Okay, I do have a closing question for you too that we'll come back to, but I don't know who was first, but I'll go Scott and then Rick. If you do have a question, do your little raised hand thing so that we can see it in the box. Thank you. So Scott?
Thank you, Sally. John, a little red flag went up in the back of my mind as you were talking about improving the seniority law. And I absolutely agree with you that they did not complied with the intent, at the very least, of the law. And the letter is highly vague and highly subject to interpretation. So that needs to be shored up quite a bit. The red flag that went up, however, was the idea that if we improve this to the point where we might be trotting on our ability to claim that we don't have reasonable assurance of reemployment, could this impact on unemployment benefits that adjuncts currently enjoy in California? And I have an opinion about that, but I wanted to just float that question because my guess is that this is not well understood by everybody, and I thought you or maybe Evan could speak to that momentarily.
If I can address Scott's question, regardless of the seniority system, if it's done correctly and ethically and morally, we are still contingent faculty. It's still dependent on student enrollment. It's still dependent on class offered because of budget cuts, maybe. And then we still have the issue of deans or disgruntled department chairs who go after part-time faculty. And the seniority system is great on paper, but if you don't have good evaluation procedures and countermeasures for bad evaluations and a chance to redeem yourself the following semester, the next semester, a corrective. The seniority system is the unemployment issue is a non-issue. When we attempted to change our name from temporary to contingent labor a few years back, CFT attacked the bill back then. And we had to go to, and we got a letter from the EDD director, and he said flatly, and I've got on it if you want it, flatly, that, I lost my train of thought, that EDD would not be affected at all, okay, period. And of course, CFT came back and they still oppose it for another reason. So anyway, there's a lot of flack when we try to do something for ourselves. And this is the problem that I faced when I went to Sacramento. The first question is, well, what organizations support this? What they're really saying, who opposes this? And we got to be honest. And I say, well, so-and-so says no, so-and-so says yes, so-and-so say no, so-and-so say no, so-and-so say no. And it's like, I'm cutting my head off before I can give a presentation about why this bill is important. So I think Frank says we need to seek out allies. And I was very encouraged by AB 897 because everybody was on board. It's a no-brainer. And CPFA was a co-sponsor of that. And so, that I hope that answered that question. Go ahead. Evan, did you want to follow up on that?
No, I think you covered it. I have nothing else to add. Thank you.
All right. So, Rick, are you ready for a question or comment?
Yeah, thanks. I want to make a comment, which may probably be seen as not that relevant, but I want to make a comment about the big picture that we're facing, our reality. We're facing the greatest crisis of our lifetimes. You know, it's not just the pandemic, but the environment. I could go on with other examples. And the Democratic Party, which has been supported by our unions and our organizations, they're supposedly the alternative party. They dominate the state government. They have absolute control over the state government. Yet they've allowed our modern day robber barons like Musk and Zuckerberg to gain more wealth in just the time of the pandemic than is greater than the state deficit. Yet the state government is leaving that wealth untouched that could be used to address our problems. And you know, I'm just finding that extremely troubling. I mean, these guys are accumulating, you know, just billions and billions of dollars that could be used to address our needs. So maybe, again, this may not be the most relevant thing because you're getting down into the trees of the forest, but maybe you could respond to my comment about the Democrats and their failures in California.
So yeah, Rick, I actually think it is relevant. You know, certainly to your point, you are 100% accurate. You know, Democrats have had the power, all the power levers for a number of years now, certainly since I started at FACC back in 2012. And, you know, you have things like, you know, Proposition 30, which did increase taxes on the wealthy, right? And brought a lot more funding into our community colleges. And then there was a follow-up initiative that did that as well. Governor Brown supported it and was a big reason why Prop 30 passed. So I think you find some examples of specifically this idea of sort of this wealth inequality and how that can be amended to try to fund things like community colleges, right? Having said that, you know, to your point, you have the richest folks in California still making an insane amount of money, and you still have our community college systems deeply underfunded. Now, I have a couple of things, though, that I wanted to add to that, which is during the end of the last legislative session, there was a few bills that were proposed that would increase taxes on the super wealthy. One of them was a wealth tax, and then others were just, you know, increasing the income tax. And then the other one was, I think, on income tax deductions. They were unsuccessful, but they were also proposed at the very last minute. And I think they were mostly just sort of to kind of set the tone for this next year. So what I suspect is that we will see some legislation brought on behalf of legislators that would, you know, in a variety of different ways, look at increasing taxes on the wealthy to help fund many of our services within our state, hopefully including community colleges. Now, of course, we had something on the ballot that wasn't about taxing individuals per se, but Proposition 15, which was about increasing or sort of changing the tax code when it came to Prop 13, that would have, again, they're still counting votes on that one, but would have brought more revenue into the system. And again, that was something that was supported by Governor Newsom. So I think it's a fair critique of the folks that are in the legislature and in the governor have been governors over the recent years. I think we do have a responsibility to hold folks in power accountable. Absolutely. So I think it's a relevant and fair comment, Rick, and I'll be curious to see what this next year looks like in terms of what legislation is proposed to kind of get at what you're talking about. And I think there will be legislation, and we'll see if it's successful. You know, the political dynamics are interesting. I always tell people, like, from if you zoom out and you see, you know, a state capitol dominated by Democrats, you may see one thing, but when you zoom in, you see a lot of Democrats that are moderate Democrats that have been supported by business interests. And business interests have realized in this state, the Republican Party just isn't going to hold power, but who can hold power is moderate Democrats that will be more friendly to their interests. And you see time and time again, you see elections that come down to these sort of battles. And oftentimes the ones that are the consequential votes to getting these sort of more progressive things passed are those same Democrats. So I would say, you know, not all Democrats are the same, and our politics are super nuanced, and it requires sort of the same amount of political pressure, regardless of who's in power, required to sort of make those changes. So that's kind of a long answer, Rick, but I do appreciate your comment, and I do think it's relevant.
I'd like to add something is that we can have all the money in the world for the community colleges, but unless we don't fix the administrator's mindset, as Letitia pointed out this morning, that this paradigm, this culture, administrators and full-time faculty, when they see a pot of money, they just have no sense of equity involved in their mindset. And I'm making a general sweeping statement here. We do have allies, but you know, these wall-to-wall units in these districts, they're almost on the same page, same cutout. They just do what they want to do. And we're an afterthought. And then they're going to come back with the 75-25 thing, 25% thing. So it's money is good. It's important. Taxing the rich, I have no problem about that. But unless we change the administrator's mindset and the full-timers, those who are in control, mindset, we're still going to be an uphill battle in terms of parity pay, office hours, you name it. And so, in short of a revolution, I'm not sure, you know, in the next couple of years this is going to happen. My last point I forgot to mention that maybe instead of piecemeal legislation, maybe we should think about some sort of omnibus bill that covers all the items that, I forget her name yesterday, in fact, she talked about this and this and this and this, all these beautiful line items for part-time faculty, and insert the Vancouver model as well. Now you're really going to get a good conversation going. So that's my last pitch.
Yeah, I think you're referring to Deirdre that with FAC. Is that yeah? There's a couple things in the chat, but I want to just come back to this equity thing, because equity is, you know, a big deal, and it's a small word, but it can be taken so many different ways. And I remember seeing this description of it, which I think was applied to a different group of people, but I was looking at it in the respect of non-credit faculty, because part-time faculty is one thing, then there's non-credit faculty that are even below usually pay and everything. But it says equity refers to the practice of intentionally creating conditions whereby actual equality can be achieved in the short and long term by providing additional resources to account for the fact that current conditions of inequity are decades old, pervasive, cumulative, and interwoven. There it is. So let me ask, actually, Arnie, do you want to say what you had said in the chat, because it relates to what somebody else had put in there about academic freedom? I think Arnie's with us somewhere.
No, I was just monitoring the chat, and there was a good question from Shadeh, which was, I'll read it. One issue I've come across has been full-time faculty sustained retaliation admitted by the administration against a part-timer based on academic differences. And these academic differences are not grievable, so the administration did not recognize it as a problem. So we're asking about these differences in teaching modality, course offerings, etc. So the question was, does this follow under academic freedom? I know Evan had mentioned academic freedom being a priority, but this idea of not having it be grievable would be a follow-up question. How would you address that?
I have to think about that one. I mean, I certainly the not being grievable thing. I would have to really know the details of that, right? I mean, that's sort of a local union thing to take a look at. But what I will say, zooming out to sort of what I think is also being implied there about sort of teaching modality and sort of how you choose to teach in the classroom, your technique, those sort of things. That's absolutely within academic freedom. Absolutely, right? I mean, that's what academic freedom is. So that's what we're trying to defend and trying to protect. And certainly we've seen cases, I think, recently over time where that has been under threat. I mean, we've had, we weren't able to do it this past year because of COVID, but we had an academic freedom conference the year prior. And we had, geez, I'm blanking on his name, but we had a constitutional scholar come and talk to us about academic freedom and sort of the pressures that are going to be on, been on it recently and will continue to be so when you have sort of this intrusion into the classroom of how people should teach, what they should teach, those sort of things. And oftentimes that intrusion comes from a very sort of political place that we've seen sort of, in various places and when it comes to legislation and things of that nature. So we, as an organization, feel very strongly about continuing to protect academic freedom. And certainly, I think at least the piece about sort of how you teach in your classroom, those sort of things, that aspect of it, I think definitely falls into it. In terms of the grievance piece, I would really have to know more about the specific issue. So I apologize, I can't dive deeper into that. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
I have a comment. If I can, Sally, can I follow up on that?
Oh, sure. Then I'm going to ask Debbie, and then Scott has his hand up.
Okay. That's a good question, Arnie. Academic freedom must also include what we do outside the classroom. In other words, there are many of us on social media, and all it takes is one student, one community person to complain about a post that I may have put out on my social media. We've lost 2, maybe 3 instructors of their activism in the community, and they all got let go. So academic freedom is not just in the classroom, but also your community involvement. And social media is a Pandora box. It can be wonderful and it can be destructive. And we need to keep in mind that academic freedom is also entails what you do outside the classroom. So food for thought, Evan. And I'll help you on that later.
Debbie, did you want to offer some? I thought I saw your physical hand raise up. Okay, Debbie, and then Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Just a quick point, since we are in the process of researching this bill idea, everybody's feedback is really valuable. So I just wanted to put this out there. And Evan, I don't know if you mentioned this, but what is also part of this bill idea is the idea that we would get a definition of academic freedom in law. So not just in our contracts, this would be statewide. And then we would mandate that academic freedom with due process is bargained locally. So it would be a statewide mandate to bargain something. It's due process would be a protection locally. So that's the idea that we're going with. I don't know if that helps.
Real quick, my experience, if you don't have any teeth in any of these bills, you can mandate all you want. If there's no teeth, consequences, that's another avenue that we all need to look at.
Good point. And Scott, thanks for waiting patiently.
I just have an observation. One of the colleges I work at about 2 years ago, the union negotiated with the district to permit individual departments to tailor their evaluation forms for their adjunct faculty to meet the needs of the department. And this was done with the Senate cheerleading. Okay, yes, this is a good thing. And then when it came down in my department, wherein the full-time faculty have a definite opinion about teaching modality, an opinion that I agree with, by the way, they decided to make those modalities positive check boxes on your evaluation, but counter modalities negative boxes on your evaluation. And I fought diligently and maybe that's why I'm not teaching there now, I don't know. But I actually won the point that things that full-time faculty would consider to be protected by academic freedom should not find their way into adjunct evaluations. And so just a perspective, this is happening around us, and we need to think about these things and be careful.
Thank you, Scott. I do have a follow-up question for both Evan and John, which actually works out well because I didn't see other hands up. So we'll kind of wind this session up with this, and then we still have time for more sharing. Let's see, the last closing question is, what are some things, and you've covered some of this already, but what are some things part-time faculty can do now with regards to advocacy and moving the cause forward? But before you go into that, I want to just give one quote from Robert F. Kennedy. And he's in 1960, I don't remember the exact year, he said, each time a man stands up for an ideal or the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And so that's what I want to keep in mind with people here is that, yes, you're just one person, but we're all part of a coalition and of many groups working together, and your voice does matter. And so keep that in mind, that even just something you can do, and there are some full-time people here, we definitely need your help with this. So back to the question, what are some things that part-time faculty can do right now for advocacy with regard to advocacy and moving the cause forward for part-time faculty? And Evan, do you want to take it first, and
Sure.
then John?
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, I think that it really is, there really is a lot each of you can do on this call here today to be able to impact all of the things we've discussed over the course of this event. And thinking about it, right? You always try to think about, okay, what are your strengths? Like politically, as an organization, as an entity, as someone who wants to make change, like what are your strengths that you can play off of? And we certainly understand, I think, as part-time faculty, there's strength in numbers. No doubt about that. As the largest, amount of faculty within our system, those numbers can be used politically to be able to push forward, I think, in very powerful ways. Now, we've had twice as many people during this virtual part-time symposium than I think we've ever had when we were in person. And I understand that as part-time faculty, it is very challenging for all of us to be able to meet in person, right? As a group, I kind of heard that conversation earlier on. So it's kind of been unique. That benefit of being able to meet virtually has allowed us to have more people. So in thinking about that, there are some advantage to this virtual modality that we can use with advocacy. And one of them, I think, is to be able to meet with legislators a lot easier right now, because you can meet virtually as opposed to having to go to Sacramento and meet with them, or having to go to their district office, which may not be near you, or you may not have time to be able to get to. So I think the one thing that can be done is if you all schedule a meeting with your legislators to be able to talk to them about all the issues we talked about today. I think they really need to hear the perspective from you all that are in the classrooms to be able to make the change that is necessary. We advocate on behalf of you regularly, and we have these meetings, but to be able to hear from the folks on the ground themselves, that really makes a difference. So I'm going to, now a lot of you may already know who your legislators are and how to contact them, but I'm going to put a link in the chat that will allow you to figure that out if you don't know how. As you being their constituent, they will meet with you. You just ask them, hey, I want to meet and talk about what's happening at my college, specifically tie it to COVID and things of this nature, right? I mean, prioritize it, make it raised to the top of the list based off of everything you're doing. So again, you have that benefit of that perspective. You have the benefit of as part-time faculty in general, having the numbers. But you all are incredible, the work you do for your students. I mean, community colleges are life-changing. I went to community college. I'm a former community college student. I had incredible faculty, incredible part-time faculty. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, I'm like, wow, that person was part-time. It's incredible. Like the legislators don't necessarily know this, and many of them were community college students themselves. So these are stories that need to be told, and you all are just incredible at doing this sort of work, and they need to hear about it, and that's an advantage to tap into. So I really believe that why we have this virtual modality space that is mandatory for all of us, I think we should take advantage of that. I would hope that every single one of you can schedule a meeting with your legislator, bring your colleagues along, even better if you can bring your students along, have these conversations now leading up to January. So then in January, they're already prepped, they're ready to go. And then we can sort of just, have the full on advocacy work done there. So I will kind of put in the chat some examples of just kind of how you can do that real quickly, figure out how you can reach out to. And I want to, because I know we're close to time here. I have a few other ideas, but I want to make sure John can speak here on this as well.
Thank you. Besides joining CPFA, you'll be put on an email list that we're starting to use e-journals, electronic journals. So we'll have updated news about what's going on in Sacramento and throughout the state. But one of the problems that we face, and I think everybody's faced it, everybody knows somebody that has no clue what's going on. Zero. They just got their narrow visors on, they're working, they're keeping their nose clean, hoping for that full-time job, getting a full-time position. That is very problematic. So educating is very important. Education, and then as Evan says, this is the perfect time to contact your local legislators. And the key is, what I've learned from FACC and Jonathan Lightman, is building a relationship with your legislators and the political director, to the point the person who answers the phone call. They know you because you've been establishing a relationship. So when January comes around and February comes around, when we have bills actually being authored and co-sponsored, now you can call back again and say, hey, I noticed this bill is up now. Here's my opinion. And so relationship building is very important with legislators in Sacramento. Do it now. Start on Monday, because that's where you have an advantage. We don't have the money. We can contribute $10,000 to our campaign chest, but we do have voices. And so I think relationship is very important with legislators. That's one thing I learned. That's what Jonathan Lightman told me. Relationship with legislators. So when the push comes to shove, you've already established that base. They know your first name. They know where you work at. And so people like Scott and Raymond and David and Carol, who are all on the board, I know they've already established a relationship with legislators, but it can't just be us six of us. It's got to be everybody from 38,000 of us. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. See, we still have a little bit of time. So again, if you have a question, you can put click your little hand. I think Keith does, but let me do one thing, and this might be a can of worms that we don't want to go down too far, but people are mentioning overload, and it's on everybody's mind nowadays, because as precarious and contingent faculty, we're the ones that get very strongly affected by overload. So I'm going to keep this a little bit in the frame of what we're talking about now. Do either of you have, not necessarily an opinion, because that's fine, but is there any kind of legislation or anything that can be done more like statewide about overload and the abuse of it? Not just the abuse, but the fact that it takes place, especially in these times that are so challenging for us. So either Evan or John, if you want to address that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump on this real quick. CPFA is looking at this. We do want to find an author about this overload issue. It is being abused, and for all the reasons that we already know. I forgot to mention that what's really abusive and sinister, when they have department chairs, they get release time. Then they turn around and take more classes. It's like, hello, why are you taking more classes when you already have a job as a department chair person, responsibilities? So those are the things that we're going to look at coming January, or between now and January and February. But it takes the legislator to author a bill. It takes educating the legislator. Once we think we have a legislator in mind, we narrow it down to a couple. Then we're going to ask other unions and FACC to join us if they possibly can. And then we're going to ask you You, because you've already established a relationship. Then you pick up the phone in January and February. Hey, CPFA's got an offer about this overload. This is how it impacts me. And so that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do in the future. Again, it's a no-cost item. That's the key for any legislation, especially during COVID-19 and our budget going to be hurt.
The only thing I would add is, yeah, I'm not aware of any legislation on that item either. It's something we have
No.
discussed and looked into. So we'll kind of see how that plays out here next year.
And I'm going to defer to a couple of people. Well, one person I don't think we've heard from yet, and then a couple of others. So I'm going to see if Terry has her hand up, then we'll go to John. And I think Keith did have, I don't know if Keith, you still want to say something, but Terry first, if you'd like to express yourself.
I was unfamiliar with the law about seniority. Can you tell me where I should be looking about that?
Evan or John?
If you could, probably the best way is send me an email, J Martin, letter J Martin at cpfa.org. I'll send you the link to the language. I'll send you the link to the Senate analysis and the Assembly analysis of the bill. I do know that in my earlier presentation that this bill is a start. It's not the end of all end because there's problems with this bill. So that's the short answer. So if you want more information, I can help you with that.
I've just had these are the two bill numbers of AB 1690 and SB 1379. That's what we're talking about, right, John? Okay.
Yeah, okay. And John Gofsky?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, on advocacy, I agree with everything you guys have been saying about Sacramento and how important this is. One thing that we haven't talked about in terms of advocacy, and this is a difficult thing to talk about in many contexts because they're usually in union meetings, is the democracy within our own unions and senates. And that varies really wildly across the state. In some wall-to-wall units have very good representation of full and part-time faculty, and other unions do not. And the unions are really powerful in the struggles that we face. And so I've had many conversations with people in this room about how difficult it is to work within their own unions. And some of you have given up and have kind of tried to figure out how to get around the union. And I don't have an answer for that because the culture is so different in different unions in the state. But I have trouble seeing how we're going to make significant progress on these issues without the real support of the labor unions in California, our own unions. So I think we need to advocate for ourselves within our own unions if we think that needs to be changed. So for example, what are the institutional barriers in your union? Is it mandated that you have some kind of proportional or equal representation with full and part-timers on your negotiating team, in your stable of officers, in your executive council, in your general council? I mean, like, what are the numbers? Who's at the table? You know what they say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I've heard a lot of people say, well, our union bargained this away and the full-timers in our negotiating team bargained that away. It's like, well, are there part-timers in the bargaining team? And if there's not, why not? And demand that there should be. And look internally. And I know we can't really have these kind of conversations in our union meetings sometimes, state and local, because they're difficult. I certainly have trouble bringing this up within CFT meetings because, you know, it's a sensitive topic. Now, in a situation like this, where this is sponsored by FACCC and CPFA, it's much easier to talk about this. So in context like this, I wish we could have more discussion about the internal dynamics of our own unions, which we can't have in other contexts. So I think that's a piece that's missing from when we talk about advocacy, because that, you know, we can really make some change there if we really push it. We have the numbers, right? And I'm not saying, hey, let's take over our unions, but we need to have more of a voice in these unions. In the cases where we don't, we need to look at why. And if there's institutional barriers, we need to change bylaws. We need to look at why we're not in these seats of power within our own unions. And I think that will give us a lot more bang for the buck. As John Martin said, you know, you go to Sacramento and the first thing they say is, well, you know, what organizations support this, what don't, you know? And so even with the best advocacy efforts in Sacramento on organizing among ourselves, we also need to bring the unions along. And the Senates, they're even worse, but we won't even get there yet. So anyway.
Okay, so I want to just do a time check here. We still have a little bit of a follow-up that between John and I, me bringing things together. So we only really have about another minute. If somebody has a burning question or something they can say quickly, is that, oh, Scott took his hand away. So, okay, thank you. And Keith, can you be quick, or did you still have something?
I'm known for two things. One is calling for equality and the abolition of the two-tiered system. The other is for getting the full-timers out of our unions. And this is an argument based upon the law of unions nationally. And what I mean by that is that our bargaining units should be composed of people with a community of interest, not conflicts. The two-tiered system sets up conflicts. Second of all, we should not have supervisors in our unions. Now, I don't know the situation in California, but in Washington, our union leaders are also our department chairs and our division chairs. And therefore, they are our supervisors. And other unions don't have this. And therefore, we need to concentrate not on begging the full-timers to let us represent ourselves, but in finding ways to represent ourselves. And if it can't be within the unions, then it has to be outside the unions. And my experience has been in Washington that all of our gains have come outside the unions through our legislature. And in the 25 years I've been an activist, they've bargained literally nothing for adjuncts in Washington state. And they fought us tooth and nail in the legislature, but that's where it comes from. So we have to realize that there are structural problems, which is that our supervisors and people with tenure, when we have none, are running our unions. Now, Frank Costco is here, and congratulations on your beard, Frank. But I have to say that if your union were to be dedicated to overthrowing the two-tiered system, they'd be worth supporting. But until that day happens, we need to do what women have done, what Blacks have done, and we need to separate to integrate. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. That probably is an interesting thing to end this part on, because I'm sure people are thinking, oh, I have an opinion on that. So, but it is, yes, we definitely need strength in our numbers. We also, as some people have presented, we need allies, and we need people that have power. So unfortunately, a lot of times we don't have that power, but in our organizing, we do, and building coalitions, et cetera. So I'm just so happy that we had all this wonderful discourse and discussion. This was an opportunity to promote solidarity in our precarious environment with precarious workers. So the FAC wanted to provide a platform for meaningful discourse, good discussion, and debate. And I think that happened. Our goal was to, as John said, establish relationships. We wanted to share ideas, build alliances with other labor movements. And I believe we achieved that in the symposium. And hopefully you got some new ideas, feel a little bit better about the movement forward. And between FAC and CPFA and all the other organizations, we will stay in touch, and we will all work for you to move forward. I'm going to, let's see, I see a little thing here. Can the reps of each group keep in touch to plan more events like this? Yes, a couple of people did mention that perhaps because this was quite popular and a lot of people wanted to express their voice, I think it's a good idea between all the organizations, but FAC and CPFA, so we don't overlap, that we can do more of these a little more often. And I think that's a great idea. So with that note, I'm going to conclude, because we won't be keeping this open so you can all chat, but I'm going to conclude this, this symposium and just encourage you to go out and get in some good trouble. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye all.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone.
Good job.
Thank you, John. Thank you,
Just a
everyone.
reminder.
Evan, Debbie,
A
all our
reminder to
leadership.
everyone
Thank you,
to save
John.
the chat.
Are people staying on to
Reminder,
chat?
Save the chat before
they
it goes
can.
away. Yes.
Save your chat. We're going to quit the meeting in about 30 seconds.
And thank you, everybody, for having your volume up. I have been in so many Zoom meetings where people don't know how loud or how soft they're talking.